Hi, this is Caleb Cain, and welcome back to Cain Course World History. Today we're going to be continuing our studies with World War I. You know what, wait, time out. We've been going at World War I for a long time. I think we need a little bit of break. It's halftime. And for your halftime entertainment, I present to you the Russian Revolution. This is a pretty big event in the grand scheme of things when it comes to modern history. So I don't want to rush through it. Come on. All right, let's go. Well, the Russian Revolution definitely takes place during World War I. It's a little bit separate, and it is crazy. But before we jump right into the revolution, we need to cover some things with the context of what's going on in Russia at this time. Let me give you a little perspective. It's Easter Sunday, 1913. And at the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, or as it's now called, Petrograd, Tsar Nicholas II presents to his wife, Alexandra, a beautiful, gem-encrusted Fabergé egg. You might have heard of Fabergé eggs before. They're a Russian specialty. These eggs often have religious connections and significance, but also serve as sort of a crown jewel of the Romanov family in Russia. And they've been all over pop culture before. In one of the James Bond movies, it's the focus of the Bond villain. One of them is stolen in the movie Ocean's 12. You'll probably recognize them. But this egg in particular in 1913 had major significance for the history of Russia. Let's take a look. One of almost 50 Fabergé eggs created in Russia, this one was meant to commemorate the 300-year anniversary of the Romanov dynasty. 300 years is a long time for one family to rule a country. And when you think about Russia, you might remember that Russia had very humble beginnings. Remember, it came out of the destruction of the Mongol Empire. And for it to become the imperial success that it was pretty unprecedented. So the egg itself was supposed to symbolize the journey and the success of Russia under the Romanov dynasty. It's truly what brought Russia to being an imperial power. The Romanov family dynasty had begun in 1613 with the coronation of Michael Romanov. It's often considered to be the start of modern imperial Russia. The most famous and influential Romanov was certainly Peter the Great, who, as we discussed, built the new capital of St. Petersburg and westernized and modernized Russia to be like the rest of the world, doing things like building a new modern navy. By World War I, as we have discussed, Tsar Nicholas II is now in power. Here's a picture of him and his family, who will be the last of the Romanov dynasty. Nicholas certainly thought he was the next in a long line of successful and powerful czars. But he kind of botches it. Yes, Nicholas and his family is the last of the Romanov dynasty. You might actually know one of his daughters fairly well. Her name is Anastasia. There's a whole movie created about exactly what we're talking about today. It seems like it's a Disney movie. It's actually not, but it's animated. And I'm going to tell you right now, about 2 minutes of that movie are actually historically accurate. We'll get to that later. By the time World War I rolls around in 1914, we know that Tsar Nicholas and Russia play a major role in this. In fact, many historians blame Tsar Nicholas for instigating much of this war. But so much of what happens to Russia during World War I is a direct reflection of what happened just 10 years before. 1905 is a turning point in Russian history. Let's refresh. Remember, 1905 was a rough year for Russia. They lost the Russo-Japanese War, which completely humiliated the country and drained its resources. Before that, Russia had also been humiliated in the Crimean War, and Russia had refused to truly industrialize like other countries had. So from an economic standpoint, it's safe to say Russia is struggling. When a country has economic problems, generally the common people aren't very happy, especially if they're out of food and they're hungry. You could say they're hangry. Maybe they should have just had a Snickers. As food shortages increased, workers and farmers stormed the Winter Palace, many of whom were brutally executed by the palace guards. And we see a continuation of the same behavior from Tsar Nicholas II. He really doesn't do anything. But at this point, public support for the Tsar is lower than it's ever been. So Nicholas has to do something. After the 1905 revolution, Tsar Nicholas II did create the Duma, an elected body of officials. The Duma was meant to give more public participation in government and hopefully check the Tsar's power. But it was set up in a way that was relatively ineffective. So when World War I officially breaks out in 1914, Tsar Nicholas still has complete total power. And as long as he thinks he has that and he's the Tsar, things seem pretty good to him. As seen in 1913 when he gives his wife the Fabergé egg. It seemed like everything was great in the Romanov dynasty, and that dynasty would live on forever, and Tsar Nicholas and his family would go down in legend. But as we've discussed, we know World War I was a disaster for everyone involved. It wasn't the adventure that people thought it would be, and it didn't benefit rulers the way they thought it would. And by 1917, when this war is really starting to heat up, Russia is in serious trouble, especially on the front lines. As Russia continued to struggle in World War I, Tsar Nicholas decided to take matters into his own hands, going to the front lines to lead the war effort himself. I could spend a lot of time discussing the military failures of Russia, but just know this, they were really bad. The bigger problem is that the rest of Russia remained ungoverned. When Nicholas left, his wife, Alexandra, the Tsarina, was left in charge, and she didn't really understand how to handle the growing pressures and issues back home. So she needed to turn somewhere for support. And that support came from a new royal advisor who was very unexpected. A self-proclaimed healer and holy man, Rasputin gained influence with the Czarina Alexandra by healing their only son, Alexei, of his hemophilia, a perpetual disease and bleeding disorder. Whew! That picture will give you nightmares. Turns out Rasputin wasn't really a great guy. He was trying to manipulate the Tsar. And he influenced some decisions that really caused the power of the Tsar to weaken and made the situation in Russia all the more worse. This is why loyalists to the Tsar actually plotted to have Rasputin killed. Now, some of this might be myth and legend. We don't actually know how much of this is true. But the story goes that they tried to assassinate Rasputin, giving him cakes that were laced with cyanide. And the cyanide didn't kill him. So they chased him out of the house and shot him a few times, and he still didn't die. The chase ensued, and he ended up falling through the ice of the Volga River, where he eventually drowned. Regardless, we know that Rasputin was a whack job, and he really screwed up Russia even more. World War I drained Russia's resources. Peasants and workers began to storm the city of Petrograd, formerly St. Petersburg, demanding for bread and financial aid. Often known as the February Revolution, this was more of a demonstration, but it did get the attention of the Tsar, leading to significant changes in Russian government. All of these demonstrations and mini-revolutions forced Tsar Nicholas to abdicate, and the Duma formed a new provisional or temporary government to try to get them through World War I. But this wouldn't last either. As the provisional government of Russia continued to struggle, the Marxist ideas of the radical Vladimir Lenin became very popular with workers and farmers alike. Lenin, a radical who had been exiled by Russia during World War I, had been sent back into Russia by Germany in an attempt to weaken the Russian war effort, led an army of activists in a new socialist revolution against the Russian provisional government. Lenin was the leader of a political party called the Bolsheviks. Yeah, be careful when you say that one. And most of his ideas reflected the ideas of Karl Marx and communism and socialism. He specifically capitalized on the formation of groups called Soviets. The Soviets were united workers and soldiers. Uniting them together, Lenin had the bulk of Russian population and power in his pocket. And what ensued is a socialist takeover of Russia. Along with the leadership of Leon Trotsky, Lenin and the Bolsheviks promised the people of Russia peace, land, and bread. In the wake of both World War I and the February Revolution, it's easy to see why this movement became so popular. Later in 1917, the Red Guards, or the soldiers of the Bolsheviks, led a hostile takeover and tried to seize power from the Russian provisional government, invading the Winter Palace. Long seen as a symbol of the power of the Tsar and the Romanov family, the fall of the Winter Palace signified the end of Imperial Russia. The takeover was bloodless, but now the Bolsheviks were truly in power. All right, now back to the Anastasia story. When the Bolsheviks took over, they took the Tsar's family hostage and put them under house arrest. Eventually, as the revolution continued, all of the members of the family, including the children, were brutally executed. All of the family's bodies were recovered except for the Princess Anastasia. So it's always been a historical mystery of what actually happened to her. Did she die or did she escape? Well, the Disney-fied version of the movie Anastasia says that yes, she survived and ran off on a quest to Paris, and there's all sorts of magic and mysticism with Rasputin as the enemy. Like I said, not historically accurate. And unfortunately, most historians believe that she perished along with her family. Regardless, this is the end of Imperial Russia. It's the end of the Tsars and the end of the Romanovs. And now Russia's going to look extremely different. In fact, we're not even going to call it Russia anymore. After officially taking power in 1918, the first thing Lenin did was sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany, which Russia officially surrendered and pulled out of World War I. It allowed Lenin to consolidate control and make some changes to Russia. For the next 3 years, Russia would be engaged in a brutal civil war between the Whites, who still supported the Tsar and the imperial family, and the Reds, who supported the new Bolshevik government. In the midst of this, Lenin instituted new communist policies in Russia. Under the guise of war communism, or that this was necessary because war was going on, the government seized land, businesses, banks, and many other aspects of society. all in an attempt to make things equal and supposedly better for everyone. It changed Russia forever. The result in 1921 was the formation of the new Soviet Union, a socialist state who will be very familiar in the rest of world history. Following the death of Lenin in 1924, Joseph Stalin, a military leader, would take over the Soviet Union and would come to dominate Soviet politics for the foreseeable future. This came after a power struggle between Stalin and Trotsky that resulted in Trotsky being forced to flee from Russia. While hiding in Mexico, a Stalin agent hunted down Trotsky and killed him with a pickaxe. I can't make this stuff up, people, it's real. Gruesome, this type of action comes to be synonymous with the Soviet Union, a nation that will represent the opposite side of the idealistic struggle that emerges between the United States and the communist world after World War II. All of that was truly set up by these events during World War I in the Russian Revolution. Like all revolutions, the Russian Revolution once again shows us the flaws that take place in government and just the overall inability we have as humans to get along with each other. And it points out some of the truths that we pointed to all year. People are lazy, people are jerks, and the people with power tend to make the rules. In this case in Russia, we've seen the power shift to a new group of people and a whole new set of rules. And that changes the course of history forever. But the end of that story, well, that's a story for another day. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.